This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn, Robert, and I are thrilled to have Frances Brown back with us at the Roundtable. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, go check it out. Frances is an award-winning author of supernatural suspense, contemporary romance, and women's fiction. She writes paranormal romance novels under the pen name Claire Gem. So we talked all about paranormal romance last episode, and today we are talking about dual point of view stories. Common in romance, but of course you can have dual POVs in any genre that you like. And Frances, we're going to put links, all of your links and your book cover and everything on the show notes page, but why don't you just tell us where listeners can find you so we get that in here?
Okay, you can find me at clairegem.com. That's my website. I have an author page on Amazon, and I'm on Goodreads as well, and I'm also on Twitter my Twitter handle is at Gemwriter, Gemwriter, and Facebook, I also have, it's facebook.com/clairegem.author.
Excellent, thank you, and that's Claire with an E, Claire Gem. Perfect.
Yes. I also have a YouTube channel which has trailers for almost all of my books.
Oh, fun. All right. Well, dual POV. So hopefully it's not too obvious a question, but romance novels, dual POV stories. Would you ever have a romance novel with a single point of view? Do you need to have dual POVs in a romance?
I can't imagine writing a successful, fulfilling romance story without getting inside the heads of both of my romantic characters. It would sort of be like, I don't want to say be like being married. I can't read my husband's mind, although sometimes I think I can, but it would be nice if I could. No, I think you need, in order to have an emotional depth to a story, I think you need to hear the thoughts of your hero and your heroine. And they need, I have a very narrow point of view, no pun intended, on this subject. Mm-hmm. There are a number of authors who have dual POV, but there's no clear delineation on the page. Mm. You can be in one scene and you jump from his head to her head to his head to where you're like, wait a minute, I thought that body part belonged to you. Mm-hmm. That drives me crazy.
Yes.
That's a pet peeve of mine.
Yep, me too.
I have to have a clear delineation between, okay, this is her talking, and now this is him thinking. Mm-hmm. I can't do the switching back and forth, and yet I guess it doesn't bother a lot of people, because there are some very, very successful authors that do this. They do it very well, and they don't call it head hopping. Mm-hmm. They call it close third point of view. It's head hopping. Sorry.
Right.
I like to have both points of view. Mm-hmm. And it's one of my challenges is getting inside of a man's head and trying to think like a man in order to get his point of view accurately down on the page. I guess maybe being married 40 plus years helps. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it definitely would. But I want to talk a little bit about the dual point of view. You mentioned in last week's episode that you need the attraction between the two characters, and then you need to put the wedge between them. So we're getting into plot there. You know, we know the plot is that they need to come together, but what is preventing them from coming together? So what does having two points of view let you do in constructing this story that you couldn't do in one point of view? And then I want to come back to this getting in the man's head idea. I think that's great. And let's make that its own part of our conversation here. So what do you get to do with 2 points of view in terms of crafting a romance specifically?
Okay. Well, many times it's not only an external conflict that keeps the two from getting together. Many times, and especially in my stories, maybe because I carry around a lot of emotional baggage, I don't know, but I feel like there is backstory, there is stuff that's happened in both of these characters' past that strongly influence how they are going to approach a new relationship. And without being able to get inside the heads of both characters, I could not bring that to light. I don't think it would be as clear to the reader, okay, so why is he so afraid of getting involved? You know, I mean, I know you're my boss, but I mean, I feel like I can add more depth to the conflict and to the coming together of the two people and what's keeping them apart if I can get inside both heads and reveal what inner limitations they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, are there enough options when you're writing romance after romance? How many internal sources of conflict can you find? How many flavors of personality, of backstory can you bring to this? You know, are there favorites that always appear in romance as a genre? Or, you know, of course the human psyche is broad and varied, but yeah, do you find challenges when you're constructing these characters and developing these points of view and working with those plot elements?
I do, and it's because I've read it somewhere. Someone wrote that there's only 7 or 10 real tropes for romance. There's only, you know, that many different reasons why these two can't get together and then do get together. I'm not sure I believe that, but at times I feel like I am up against the wall in trying to find something new to give the characters a reason why they can or can't let themselves get involved in this romance. One that I may play with at some point, and then we're going back over to the paranormal side, is maybe it's something that happened to them in a past life.
Right.
But in most cases, most romances, no, that's not the case. It's something that happened in their childhood, or it's something that a previous. I get tired of reading about I walked in on my girlfriend with my best friend. You get tired of that after a while. So I try to switch it up. But yes, that is definitely a challenge. Adding, my characters tend to be a little bit older. They're not all in their 20s and childless. They are a little bit older, in their 30s or 40s, and they have children. They may have teenage children. That adds another. There you go. There's another reason why I can't get involved here, is because it's not just me. It's me and my 14-year-old son who has hepatitis, and father and I break up, and so that I think can add another layer to the conflict between the characters.
Definitely. All right, Robert and Kathryn, before we go into getting into the male point of view, do you want to raise any questions or address this issue?
Yeah. When it comes to the dual POV, how do you start drawing the delineation between them? Not necessarily mechanically on the page, but in your mind, you're casting these characters. Do you tend to think about a driving flaw or emotional wound or something that each of them have that you use as your backstop for their motivations and their behaviours? That's just, I'm not putting words into your head. It's, how do you do that?
No,
what do you do?
That's exactly what I have to do. I can't start with an external conflict. I can't start with, well, he's my best friend's boyfriend. I can't start with that. I have to start with what's inside the character's head, and what past they have, and what's come before that is going through their mind when they meet this person that they're very physically attracted to, but I can't go there because. So that is where I start. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah. Well, I suppose to me that they're the most interesting stories to read when it's not just external conflict. Why have a 2 POV if it's just external conflict? Because you can describe that from 1 POV pretty easily. So, the reason for having 2 POVs is because, as you said right at the start, it gives you the luxury of being able to bury yourself deeply into both characters. So how do you execute that? Do you use internal monologues, or do you have, I don't know, flashbacks? What do you do to reveal the character to the reader without revealing them to the other POV?
You mean in the story or in the pre-writing stage?
In the story, yeah. So there's obviously, when you have them separate, you're creating some tension between the fact that you've got the 2 POVs. So there are going to be things that each don't know about the other, which is part of the point, I suppose, of having the 2 POVs. So how do you do that? Do you have the character thinking about things? Do you have them away by themselves? Most of the time using internal monologue,
Yeah, most of the time I do. I also have them, maybe talking on the phone with their sister, or, bring it out in conversation like that, because you can only do so much internal monologue without it becoming
boring.
A big chunk. Yeah, exactly, without the Z's coming off the reader.
Yes.
Yeah, and it risks doing a lot of telling as well. So that's the danger with the POV, is that you end up character telling the reader what's going on in their mind, which is it's a trap for the rookies, that's for sure.
Something you said, though, something about having the internal conflict and not just the external conflict. In our last talk, you had asked me about how I came along this far in my writing career. Do you know that one of the biggest stumbling blocks for me was at the very beginning, when I first started writing romance, I pitched to an agent at a conference, and my characters both had these huge internal problems. And she looked at it and she said, well, there's nothing here that's keeping them apart. You need an external conflict. Don't worry about that internal conflict. And I was like, huh? So
wow.
It took me a long time. Yeah, exactly. So it took me a long time to realize that she was wrong.
Right.
You do need an external conflict, but I don't think it's nearly as important as what's on the inside.
Right. Right. I would agree. As we've been talking, I've been running through some examples in my repertoire, in my knowledge base, and what it comes down to is we can overcome external obstacles if we want to, if we believe we're worthy to, if we believe we can, if we team up with somebody, so I was thinking of Notting Hill. She's a movie star and I just own a little tiny bookshop. It's never going to work out, right? So that internal perspective on we're too different, our lives will never merge, is what really has to be overcome, because the logistics, you can get there and Sleepless in Seattle, she falls in love with him because of how he talks about his wife. But his block is that he can never fall in love again because he was so in love with his wife. So again, logistics you can overcome in the end, and you do, or it wouldn't be a romance, right? We need them to come together at the end. So it's really the internal conflict that is the main hurdle, you know?
Yeah, and it always has been for me. That's how I started writing. And so I lost a number of years wandering around aimlessly, thinking I was doing it wrong, thanks to that agent. Thank you very much.
Damn her.
Yeah, really.
All right.
It's amazing how one piece of advice can throw us off that far.
That's another piece of advice to anybody who wants to get into writing, period, any genre, is don't, if somebody tells you you're doing it wrong, make sure they know what they're talking about.
Yes.
And nowadays, I mean, maybe at one time it wasn't so easy to do, but with the age of the internet, you can Google it.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And check in with your gut. What does your gut tell you? What do your instincts tell you? Do you believe in your story? It is really...
when you're first starting out, you don't know whether you have the right to believe in your story.
That is true.
It takes a long time to believe in your story, to believe that you know how to tell the story. Still, every time I start a book, I think, there's one book that I still haven't written after 15 years because I don't think I'm good enough yet.
Right.
I'm hoping I get good enough soon.
But that's I think it was Fritz Perls who said, the thing that is most left undone is the thing that drives us. So I think as a writer, it's always good to have that one thing left undone, that's just going to keep you at it. And that sounds good to me.
Right.
Yes, yeah. George Saunders wrote an essay, I think it appeared in The Guardian, about writing Lincoln in the Bardo, and
that was good.
Yeah, and he said he was turning, I think it was 50 or 50 something, and he had this idea for this book for 10 years, 20 years. And just kept not feeling ready to tackle the big, scary, creative project that he wasn't worthy to tackle. And he finally thought, okay, do I want to die? Do I want that on my headstone? The guy who was too scared to tackle the big creative project, right? So,
since I've spoken to a number of people, family and friends, about this story idea, and I keep hearing all the time, when are you going to write that book?
Yes.
When are you going to write that book? It could very well end up on my headstone because somebody will tell them to put it there.
Well, yeah. Well, see, there you just have to begin.
That's it.
Just begin, right? The rest of it will come, but or not.
My headstone might have to say he finally wrote the end.
or mine might just say the end.
Oh. Now we're in the black.
Now we're getting getting a little dark here.
I have a question about bringing us back to dual point of views.
Wait, we had a topic here?
Right. I know. What? What? When you're writing two protagonists that are they're on the page at the same time a lot of times, right? How do you choose, especially at the most emotional climactic moments for, when they're finally getting together or whatever, how do you choose which one gets to tell that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. You go with gut instinct first, and then you see if it works. And I have actually struggled with a scene in a book a number of times that I had written from the female point of view, because that's how it felt like it should be. And it just wasn't working. It wasn't working. So finally I said, I wonder what will happen if I switch over and write it from his point of view. Wow. I mean, it came to life. So it's very important to choose the right protagonist point of view. And I guess that has to do with where you are in the story, where they are in their developing relationship, and who has the most to lose by the reader finding out what's going through that character's head at that particular moment in time. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, it does to me. I would definitely lean into, if I was editing or advising, then I'd be saying, okay, well, who's got the biggest crisis here? And what's the best way to experience that? And if we're talking about some romance where it's such an internal story for two characters, where you've got probably two maturation plots coming together, they both have to grow somehow. Otherwise, why wouldn't they just get together at the start? So someone's got to have a bigger crisis than the other, and I presume I suppose it depends. If it's a two POV and there's one character who is very definitely the main character, I mean, there's always someone carrying the story more than the other, I guess.
I don't know that that's always true in my stories.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But yes, definitely there are authors where either the male or the female is carries the bulk of the POV, the bulk of the story. I feel like they need equal opportunity POV.
Right. But even in a balanced dual POV, there's always one character who's got more at stake, who's going to create more dramatic tension for the reader in that moment, who's going to be more shocked or more elated or more crushed or more. So it's the think of the response to the situation, right? And also what you're hiding or revealing for the reader's sake. So if one character knows something the other one doesn't, do you want the reader to know what character A knows, or do you want the reader to be surprised and go through the experience of discovery with character B? Right?
Right. Mm-hmm. So it would depend on too where you are in the story, at what point in the story this scene is taking place.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, should we come around to writing characters we maybe don't know from personal experience? Yes, and especially in a romance, you're writing a lot of physicality. If we could, I don't know, you're just dealing with a lot of sensory experience that is specific to that particular body. So Frances, what are the challenges that you face in writing your male point of view protagonists? And let's just dig into that. I think that's a great topic to explore.
Huge challenge. I have to many times sit down with my husband and say, okay, here's the deal.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling? And get his feedback. I actually ask him questions about things like that. In stories where the character's brother is involved or whatever, I'll go to my brother and ask him, how would you react in this situation? So again, the researcher comes to light, has to go to the source and get it right. When you're talking emotions, it's going to differ from person to person. And yes, because I'm a fiction author, thank the Lord in heaven, I can use creative license when I can't get the facts.
Mm-hmm. So
it is a challenge, though. It is a challenge for me to write male point of view, especially, it depends on the situation, but when you're talking about physicalities, like you were just, like what you just said, it's, that's a real challenge, and that's perhaps why I'm kind of drifting away from the very graphic scenes, because I'm not a man.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think that a love scene that I write is going to be more from the woman's point of view than the man's, because I'm not a man.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's a huge challenge.
So can we break down the challenges? I imagine there's sort of a logical left brain point of view challenge. How would a man see this situation? What would a man try to do in this situation? And then there's an emotional or right brain point of view. How would a man express his feelings when he's in relationship? And then there's also the physical. So I'm curious how you approach all three aspects of this, because you have to deal with all three.
I understand.
Which one?
I'm sorry?
How does a man express his feelings? What does that mean?
Well, Robert, let's ask you that question. You can be our expert, our resident expert on how men express their feelings.
Well, we retreat to our cave. We generally say nothing. And then at some point we emerge, apparently cured. So
that makes it for a terrible romance.
Yes,
I know,
plot
exactly.
just grinds to a halt because the male protagonist is in his cave.
Look, I think we misdirect. I think we project on external circumstance, and we explain. So it's very hard, I think, to get a man to speak emotionally. So even if you ask them how they feel, they'll talk about their feelings. I know I do. I think I feel this. No, you don't tell me how you think you feel. Tell me what you're feeling. And that's really hard for most men. We're not educated in it. We don't talk to each other that way. If we're in male-only circles. In general, I mean, I'm making massive generalizations about the middle bell curve. Obviously, there are extremes, and with today's gender fluidity, I mean, there's massive extremes in how people are being encouraged to express themselves, and that's a wonderful thing. I don't think any man should be boxed in the way I'm speaking generally about.
Right.
But certainly from my age group, it would be hard. You really have to tease it out. You've got to get them in the right state of mind. And I'm just talking about emotional feelings here. Maybe you've got to get them in the right space as well, because a man can be very task driven, and so you try to get them to talk about feelings anytime they're in the middle of a task, it ain't going to happen.
Yes.
No, that's true. That's very true.
But one tip is if you do want to get them to talk about it, treat it as a task. So you can, if you ask a man to solve something, they'll be on it. But if I ask them how they feel about stuff, they won't. So I think we're very solution driven. Feels like it to me anyway, as opposed to what I perceive as the female being more process driven or connection driven, if that makes sense. But
it does.
It does.
Yes. Men are fixers.
Yeah, exactly.
How do I fix it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So our first step is to strategize. If someone says, I'm feeling really sad today. Oh, well, let's go out for a coffee. No, you're strategizing now. You're not talking about the problem. Oh, I have to talk about the problem? Really? Yeah. So.
Yeah. So, Francis, when you're dealing with all of these aspects of maleness that Robert's just been describing for us, and put that into a character who's in a relationship, a romantic, intimate relationship with another protagonist, how do you go about writing that point of view?
I think, at least from my writing process, I tend to create the kind of man that I would want as my hero. My heroes tend to be all very similar in that they are strong alpha males who have marshmallows on the inside.
Yes.
And so, with that in mind, I try to imagine, okay, this male is not going to want to show his feelings. What is he going to do to get around that? And I create a character. I create a man that maybe doesn't exist. I don't know. But he's my ideal hero, so it's okay, right?
Right.
So a lot of times, my characters a lot of times do things. Here's the wacko part again. A lot of times, my characters do things without my permission or knowledge, and then it's like it just comes out. And I guess that's that right brain moment. Just I was writing a scene from the male point of view, and my male character was very frustrated, and he could not show his frustration. He could not, because of the position he's in, he could not show his anger. And I didn't even think about it. I just typed it. And then I was like, oh, he just punched the wall. Why did he do that? So a lot of times my characters, just like I said, I think it comes out of somewhere deep in your own instinct of how have you seen men react to these circumstances? And, I have fathers, and I have had brothers, and I have had a husband, and I've watched a lot of movies, and I've seen it happen. So I think we draw on that. I think we draw on our own experience, and then sometimes the character just picks up and punches the wall and without asking permission. But it seems quite authentic.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. I think the best moments for me as a writer are when I don't have to think through a thing that I'm writing. I just write it, and it comes out of that flow state or that kind of organic storytelling mode that we enter when it's working.
When it comes to writing from the male point of view, it's almost impossible for me to do that unless I just can immerse myself and I guess subconsciously draw on what I know about the men that I've interacted with over my life and have them just do things. So that's I guess the answer to your question is I have to just let my right brain take over, because I can't sit here and logically think out, well, gee, how is this man going to react? How is he going to? No, that doesn't work. It'll be even if I get it on a page, it's stilted.
Yeah.
It's and it's not natural. Whereas, like I said, when they come out and do things without asking, it's organic and it's realistic.
I think this is the writer's equivalent of method acting. I really do. I think when you immerse yourself in a character, it doesn't matter whether you're writing male, female, alien, old, young. You wear that character's head while you're writing. I think anyway, and that's one of the delightful things about writing. Is excuse me, very croaky today. It's early in the morning here in Australia. I haven't had enough coffees, and so that tends to drive stuff coming out of nowhere that you wouldn't necessarily, as you say, Francis, that you just think, where did that come from? But somewhere in us we have that innate capacity to shift into how someone else might be thinking or feeling or reacting, and although men might be traditionally not as good as that at that, that just happens to be one of our traits. It doesn't mean that we can't. And I think as a writer, that's one of the wonderful things we can explore, is how do other people think, act, and feel, because otherwise how would you write a book filled with characters? I think it's fascinating.
Right. It is fascinating. Yes.
I remember just very briefly, I was reviewing it was a YA paranormal ghost story that had a love story within it, a very successful book that was excellent, really good, really enjoyed it. And there was one thing that just tripped me right up, because the male character kept noticing all the different dresses that this girl would wear, and it just came out of nowhere. I remember saying to my co-reviewer, that doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't be looking at that. You'd be just looking, wow, she looks really hot today. You wouldn't be saying, oh, no, she's wearing a lower hemline today, and those stitches are unusual. Men don't do that.
And yet, with all of the gender blurring nowadays,
Yeah, it could be.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, depends
I think
on
it
your
just,
audience, right?
it wasn't consistent with that particular,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there was such a strong male character, fairly alpha, that it just, no, this is just the
You
one
would
thing
no
that,
way have noticed that, right?
I don't think so, no. But, I mean, well, I was reading critically because we were reviewing, so when it's a great story trumps all of that. But it is interesting how you can see some of those things. I'm sure it must be the same for women reading romances that are quite clearly written by a man. You know, sometimes you read it in reviews, you go, this author must be using a pen name and it's got to be a man because this is no female
Very
romance.
true. That is very true.
Yes. So other questions about dual POVs or anything you want to add to the conversation, Frances?
No, I don't think so. I think that there does, in order for me to write a successful or satisfying romantic relationship, I do need the 2 points of view. And I don't want them on the same page. The head hopping drives me bananas.
Yes.
But you do have to occasionally throw in the point of view from somebody on the outside. And as long as it's clearly delineated, you need somebody who knows the couple to sort of step up to the microphone and say, okay, guys, you know, and have this third point of view. And I've done that in a number of my books to try to give another kitty cat, please get he thinks he owns this desk. So, yeah, I think as long as point of view is clearly delineated and the reader is never confused as to whose head they're in, then I think it's a very critical element, especially in a romance.
Right.
And do you do that by chapter or by scene or by heading, or, you know, how do you physically set that out in your story?
I have done it by heading.
Yep.
I have done it by chapter. Sometimes, especially in a fast-paced scene where there has to be switching back and forth, I have a double space
Scene break.
between.
Yep.
Right. I don't like the dip thing unless it's going to be a major change. But when I go back and forth, I do have that. And then in the character's name or something that reveals to the reader whose head we're in has to be in the first
sentence. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Has to be. Yeah.
Smart.
Yep.
And if you are introducing a third POV, then do you surprise the reader with that later in the book, or do you have them introduced as a POV early on as well? How have you done that?
That character the reader knows who this character is. They know who they are to the main characters. But the way that I bring in that viewpoint is I start a new chapter, and it's very clearly in this third person's point of view. And it's usually a very short chapter, and it's just like a flash where I step out of the story and have this third person looking at the couple.
Nice.
That's how I've done it in the past.
Yeah.
I should also say that, and I know this is an entirely different topic, which I would love to talk about sometime, is not only point of view, but tense, present tense, past tense.
Yep.
Or first person, third person.
Yep.
One of my books, I don't think it was electricity. I know, it was Civil Hearts. I played with something that I didn't know if I would get away with. I did the hero's point of view as third person, and I did the heroine's point of view as first person. And I did divide them by chapter. And after I had sent it out to my beta readers, and I got it back, and I waited for their responses, there was only one reader that picks up on the fact that I changed from the third to the first point of view. And she said to me, she said, you know, the fact that you put the heroine in first person, I really was sucked into the story because I'm a woman and I was inside that woman's head in that first person. So you can play around a lot with point of view, but you just have to be careful and don't hop around on the page.
Right.
What is your third? Do you tend to write in third person past tense with two POVs?
I tend to write. This is weird. I tend to start a story in the first person just because I'm immersing myself in the character's head. But then, because of the fact that I have two protagonists, I tend to back out and do it third person past tense. I don't like to use present tense. But in that particular book, I kept the heroine in the first person and went to the third person for the hero's point of view. But I do tend to start out always in the first person because I'm trying to get inside the character's head. I'm trying to, where is that character's body?
Yeah,
and
almost a form of journaling.
Yeah, it is. It very much is.
Very interesting.
That is. I think that's a pro tip there. Definitely.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. People can find you at clairegem.com. And of course, we will link to everything in the show notes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this very much.
Good. It was our pleasure.
Thanks for all your insights. It's been lovely.
Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.